This is a DEFCON moment for Ukraine. Air raid sirens blasting all over the country of Ukraine at this moment, warning of potential attack from Russia, launching long-range weapons in. So you see these areas here in the red? That's the areas that are currently under air raid sirens in Ukraine.
So everywhere.
That's
all of Ukraine, in case you don't know the map.
So that means nothing is off the table for Russia at this moment. This comes after Ukraine and NATO launched another attack on the Kerch Bridge in Crimea, leaving it in critical condition of collapse. And they did it this time underwater. Here you can see the explosion under the pylons there. According to reports, Ukraine's Secret Service, along with NATO coordination, blew up the Crimean bridge. The operation took months of planning. Just like the drone strike over the weekend, underwater supports were badly damaged at the base of the bridge. You can see here, this was the previous attack on the Kerch Bridge. The bridge is now in critical condition, undrivable. NATO leader Mark Rutte says Ukraine will now join NATO. There's an irreversible path for Ukraine to join NATO, he says, which is Putin's red line, of course. Listen.
Well, you know that when it comes to Ukraine, in Washington, there was a clear commitment by all 32 allies that there is an irreversible path for Ukraine to come into NATO. Not with an end date, not understanding this as part of a peace settlement, but clearly as a longer-term commitment by all 32 allies. And we are building that bridge as we speak, with the command in Wiesbaden, with in Poland, JTEC, which is capturing all the lessons, and of course all the other cooperation ongoing between NATO countries and Ukraine. Thank you so much.
So, and
that's
we're saying
clearly based on a lie, given that Ukraine could not have executed the attacks it has over the last few days without the weapons and intelligence from NATO. So it's pretending that Ukraine's not already in the guest room, so to speak.
Right. And also some people say some parts of the bridge open. Of course, you remember how many months it took to secure and make sure that that bridge would be reopened. But again, these attacks that have been happening over the past few days, obviously being promulgated by neocons. You have Lindsey Graham, you have Senator Blumenthal, who just arrived, who were there in Kiev over the past few days. You can see, by the way, I don't know if you saw the hotel bill from Lindsey Graham, over $400,000 for his visit on June 1st. Isn't that unbelievable? And by the way, Lindsey Graham, so $400,000 for him to go to Ukraine, and his hotel bill, $400,000. And don't worry, though, who approved it? He did. So he approved he got approval from himself for the hotel bill so that they could meet with Zelensky, reiterate once again, doubling down on this idea that we are done negotiating with Putin. We've got to employ massive sanctions on Putin. That's why they were there, to push these new massive sanctions bill. President Trump was asked over the weekend, do you support Lindsey Graham's sanctions bill? Trump's like, I haven't seen it yet. I'm going to look at it. You haven't seen it yet? You do not support sanctions against Russia. You've been openly communicative about that. On top of that, sanctions haven't worked against Russia. They've been devastating for the West. They haven't worked at all inside of Russia. So now what else are we going to add into this mix? Massive amounts of sanctions, and also against China in this mix.
Now, look, I don't wish violence on anybody, but is it okay to wish that Lindsey Graham gets bed bugs from his travel? You can't die from that, right?
That guy is a creep. That guy is an absolute
of the worst
creep.
order.
Yeah, and by the way,
worst.
as I pointed out over the weekend in my video, Lindsey Graham makes a boatload of money from the defense industry, a lot of money from the defense contractors, of course, who, absolutely want him to keep pushing this war
but
further.
Who is he speaking on behalf of? Who is he representing? Because we have a president, we have a vice president. He only represents one state. And so on whose authority does he sign off on aggression when we have the Trump administration behind, otherwise working on peace deals, supposedly working on that in Istanbul this week? So why do we have these mixed messages? Another important question is, why does Russia tolerate this? Because they are obviously getting two messages as well. It's, on the one hand, we're going to peace deal. We want peace. We're leading you both to peace. And on the other hand, it's, well, Ukraine is using our weapons to attack you. So how would the Russians even wouldn't there be, if you would think, if you're Russian, wouldn't there be a growing movement inside Russia to please let's stop believing these jokers? We can't believe the United States. We can't believe Ukraine. There's no real peace agreement on the table, right?
No, there's no peace agreement at all. And of course, this was on the eve of these peace talks. This was on the eve of those peace talks. And of course, we don't actually have any information on that as to whether or not this is going to come together. Again, Lindsey Graham doesn't speak on behalf of the president of the United States. He's there. He's in Ukraine, working nefariously behind the scenes. Steve Bannon today said that he needs to be arrested, put out an arrest warrant for Lindsey Graham, get him off the streets. Ron Paul, as a former member of Congress, wondering how in the world Senator Graham was able to go there, sort of around the backs of President Trump and any negotiators, Steve Witkoff and others who are actually actively pushing for peace. So again, we'll be continuing to watch this story as it develops over the coming days, and it's unbelievable. We're also hearing from sources that there are reports, in fact, that President Trump did, in fact, know about what was coming. We don't have confirmation on that yet, but we're trying to get to the bottom of this because I think they're playing this sort of like good cop, bad cop thing right now, that sort of neocons have been doing all of this nefarious work and that the Trump administration has been completely in the dark. They didn't know this large-scale, multi-month, 18-month drone attack on Russia's nuclear infrastructure was coming? Really? You kept President Trump and his entire administration in the dark. You have CIA offices all over Ukraine, and NATO coordinated this attack. We know from multiple sources that there's no way that Ukraine carried out this attack without NATO participation, intelligence, and telemetry. Absolutely zero chance. Trump administration didn't know at all?
Well, I mean, so we are supposed to believe that after Trump and Zelensky had that falling out in the Oval Office, the Trump administration cut Ukraine off from their intelligence, and Ukraine could not fire a single bullet with any kind of accuracy. But now the Trump administration didn't know, and Ukraine was able to carry out this massive PR win on their behalf, that they somehow knew where all of Russia's bombers were. They knew how to get past Russia's security. They knew how to execute this on their own. That's very hard to believe, is it not? Yeah.
Michael Gilt in our chat, in our YouTube chat, says, I'm very disappointed in Trump's global gang right now. Yeah. And of course, you'll recall Lindsey Graham, you'll recall Senator McCain, who was there at the time, right in the middle of the Maidan Square, like filming the coup that was unfolding right before their eyes. So they're all, celebrating all of this. So we're going to have more on this story coming up here.
One more piece of it, though, unless you think this has nothing to do with you. It does. And in fact, soldiers are now in Germany taking over the training of Ukrainians at the army base in Germany. It's soldiers from the 278th Armored Cavalry Regiment of the Tennessee Army National Guard replaced the brigade from Pennsylvania. Yes. Our soldiers are in harm's way. Absolutely, they are, because they are training Ukrainian soldiers to do this. So do not fool yourself to think that this is at arm's length from us. It is not.
So how are Russians responding to this latest round of attacks inside of Russia, attacks inside of Moscow, attacks all over Russia, hitting the nuclear infrastructure, striking the Crimean Bridge on the eve of peace talks? Well, we thought we'd ask American journalist and author and former Senate aide Tara Reade, is an RT contributor and lives inside of Moscow and joins us now from Russia to talk about how this is being perceived inside of Russia. Tara, great to see you. Welcome back to the show.
It's wonderful to see both of you. And, this is a really unusual time in history. I mean, as a geopolitical analyst, I was making predictions of peace by Easter. I was thinking that we were all moving in that direction. And then here we are having this conversation when many people are saying we're on the brink of World War III. It's shocking.
The narrative from Washington, D.C., or at least we're hearing, is that President Trump, Pete Hegseth, and others were totally in the dark, didn't know anything about what was unfolding. We understand it took 18 months of planning to carry out this large-scale drone attack against these nuclear bombers. The Crimean Bridge apparently took months of planning to attack overnight. President Trump and the defense secretary completely in the dark. But I think you're hearing something different. Well, what have you learned?
Well, I've been hearing from a couple of different people, Clayton, and I really am not wanting to spread, rumors out of school, if you will. But these are reliable former intelligence and people that worked in different former administrations, presidential administrations for the DoD. They're saying that actually Pete Hegseth was with his staff watching this real time. Now, this could be a planted rumor to make Donald Trump look bad. And at this point, I wouldn't take any scenario off the table because there seems to be a real push from the neocons, particularly Lindsey Graham and others, to really put a wrench in any kind of peace talks and getting us there.
Now, if you were Russian, let's put ourselves in these shoes that American shores are under attack. Our military bases are under attack with a country that keeps telling us that they will agree to peace talks. How would we feel if our leaders said, no, we think that they're going to go to peace talks, it's going to be okay, but then American citizens were actually being killed in these attacks on bridges, on civilian infrastructure, and on our military bases? So I know how I would feel. How do Russians perceive this?
Russians, it's interesting because living here in Moscow, we are hearing that there have been many in the middle of the night, up to 300 drones, right, swarming, but being shot out of the sky before they hit Moscow. South of Moscow, the most recent one was like an hour from where, the center of Moscow. And they were all, they have very strong defense systems. But you were mentioning, the nuclear hangar where these planes were, and the equivalent of Montana. That would be, like Montana or South Dakota being attacked. I mean, and they say that this Operation Spiderweb, was 18 months in the making. Now, the Trump administration is denying knowledge. Obviously, if this started 18 months ago, it was preceded that administration. But somebody had to know because, how do you do the communications, the satellite? They're using Starlink, which is Elon Musk's company, to communicate in Ukraine. And how Russians are feeling is, very upset. There was a bridge that now we believe at the same night that you're hearing of all these other bombings, and on this bridge, a train was derailed, and it was all civilians, including children, and 7 people died, and even more are injured. And that was believed to be a Ukrainian terrorist attack. And what the Ukrainians have been doing is attacking civilian infrastructure, which is really horrible, as well as, of course, the military structure. So Russians are upset. You had a lot of Russian people join the Russian military. And the fact is, Russia is winning this war, and they're out maneuvering the Ukrainians 20-1. So for every, one Russian that dies, there's 20 more to replace them, so to speak. Whereas on the Ukrainian side, that's simply not the case. They're actually having to drag people off the street to constrict them. So the mood is was pretty hopeful when Trump came into office with the Russian people. There were people waving, wearing MAGA hats and being, because they were thinking that maybe this would be over, this proxy war that the U.S. and NATO are fighting against Russia. Russophobia would stop, things would normalize. But unfortunately, it seems they're escalating. So there's a quietness. You'll notice there's a quietness in Moscow right now, and people are very somber because, it's sad. Russia does not want war. They want peace, but they did get provoked into this position because of that coup that happened in 2014 in Kiev, and then NATO and the U.S. pushing the border up against Russia. And if this was happening in the U.S. would be responding the same way. They would have to protect their sovereign nation.
Well, I think it's worth pointing out that June 2nd, so yesterday, June 2nd, 11 years ago, is the anniversary of when Ukraine launched their first attacks against Ukraine, launched their first attacks in eastern Ukraine and hit Ukrainian civilian infrastructure and ethnic Russians and ethnic Russian forces. So 11 years ago, this, as we point out, this didn't start just a few years ago. This goes back to the coup. And so now we're sitting on the precipice of maybe Ukraine joining NATO, according to Mark Rutte today, saying that it's an irreversible path that Ukraine will join NATO. I mean, when you talk to Russians in Moscow, I mean, are they emboldened? Are they pissed that these attacks keep happening?
They're pissed. I think they're determined this will, see through. They're trying to denazify because, as you've, brought up in many of your good reporting in the show, there are Nazis in Ukraine. And what you just pointed out about 11 years ago, there were in eastern Donbass, which is the eastern part, of Ukraine, and you had 14,000 people die in 8 years, civilians, many of them children. And it took 8 years before President Putin finally decided to do this special military operation and try to protect the people of Donbass. Now, they've all voted to be with Russia, but Kiev, Zelensky, has outlawed the Russian language, has jailed political opposition, refused to have elections. So he's now the illegitimate president because there hasn't been an election. He's giving the excuse that it's wartime, but, it's wearing thin. And then, there's been a lot of war crimes as far as, human trafficking, organ, and then, of course, the biolabs. Remember, everyone seems to have forgotten about the biolabs that were U.S. sponsored, and Victoria Nuland admitted that in Congress.
Right. And so I have to imagine that Russians, and how I'm feeling, we have a lot in common because we believed that President Trump was acting in good faith to end the war in the same way we believe that Putin is acting in good faith to end the war. But now we have civilian deaths on Russian shores. And so it feels like, you don't want to go nuclear, right? Because we're a peaceful show, but it's hard to not be like, nuke this to end it, right? And so we have this frustration, this shared frustration, and I do not want that. I do not want any.
This is a surprising turn of events.
No, it's hard to not feel that way. That's not how I feel.
Well, I was asking that about the Russians, like how. They keep being attacked. They keep being attacked. How much patience do they have for this?
Both of us. This is what I'm saying: is that our patience on both sides with President Trump and President Putin has to be wearing thin. There's no other option for us as the populace of those leaders.
You make a good point, and you're bringing up the nuclear doctrine that President Putin just amended in 2024. So that's just last year. And part of that amendment was recognizing that any non-nuclear state that's being supported by a nuclear state could give a cause for a response, a nuclear response. So legally, because of what happened in that hangar, whether, there were 4 planes, or Ukraine claims there was 40, but Russia says there were 4 planes that were bombed, essentially. And what are we doing bombing, these planes and hangars anyway? How dangerous is that? But it does trigger that nuclear doctrine if President Putin chose to use it. Now, President Putin is very level-headed. He's very calm. He's going to do what's best for the Russian people. He's, and you have Starmer, in England and UK, who's claiming that they're ready for war or whatever, which they're not. They don't have an army that could properly even stand up to Russia. Russia has a huge...
No, they couldn't even beat the Houthis. Come on.
No.
Stop it.
Yeah. So this is, but I wanted to bring up Lindsey Graham because a day before these bombings happened, and there were several, there was the bridge the same day as the hangar, as I woke up in the middle of the night to reports that there was like 300 drones that were shot down that were coming towards Moscow, things like that. So, these are very serious times, right? Well, guess who was here 2 days, 48 hours before in Kiev, who was there, was Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal. Now, they somehow worked up a hotel bill in one night for the taxpayers of $800,000. There's a receipt for that. So I don't know what they ordered for room service, but quite a bill. And in that one night in Kiev, they had these talks. And then, 2 days later, you had all these bombings. And then you have Lindsey Graham kind of going rogue, saying that he's going to sponsor more severe sanctions against Russia and siding with Ukraine, which is, now that's triggering the Logan Act. And the Logan Act means that what he's engaging in is sedition.
Right.
Yeah. So senators negotiating with a foreign country without the consent of the United States president. So what was he doing there? As Ron Paul pointed out this morning, like, this is a clear violation. Steve Bannon called for him to be arrested, Lindsey Graham to be arrested. And
Absolutely.
Blumenthal.
He could be. I mean, if President Trump wanted to, he could call him into the office because he conspired with other senators and arrest him under the Logan Act because it's seditious. He needs to follow, because it's up to the president to establish the foreign policy. Now, the Senate can advise, they can recommend, they can make a big letter and say, hey, we really don't want you to do this. And any president of the United States would look at that and there would be a debate or a discussion. But in this case, Lindsey Graham has gone rogue, in my opinion.
Craig William in our chat says, there are Republicans in South Carolina voting for Lindsey Graham. I want to have a talk with you. If you ever cast your vote for Lindsey Graham, I need to talk to you. You are working against the rest of us.
You probably
don't understand. You must love war.
Well, you probably work for Boeing in his backyard or one of the defense contractor companies in his backyard.
Do you remember what Lindsey Graham said? I think it was last year. He said this war, this proxy war, is the best money we ever spent killing Russians. Yeah. And he made that really inflammatory statement. I mean, when I worked in the Senate, he was at the South Carolina House of Representatives that year. And then he went on to go on into the House before he went to the Senate. I think he was in the Senate later in 2003. But I knew of him because he was such good friends of John McCain, and he was at some sort of event. He's always been blustery. He's always been unusual and belligerent, especially about war. And, he doesn't have a wife. He doesn't have any children. I don't think Lindsey Graham cares if we go to nuclear war. I really don't. He's somehow, with his $100,000 a year salary, made multi-millions. I don't know how that is. But I would have loved it if Musk would have investigated him.
Oh, I would have loved if we actually look at this $400,000 hotel bill from him and then the other $400,000 from Blumenthal. How are you spending $400,000 at a hotel? But don't worry, Lindsey Graham says he authorized it himself. So nothing to see here, nothing to worry about. Next time I travel, I'll authorize it myself.
Yeah, a fox in the hen house. That's what that is.
Exactly. All right. Well, Tara Reid, thank you for staying up till 1 a.m. in Moscow.
It's 11:30 there, isn't it? In Moscow?
It's 11:30 actually.
Oh, 11:30. Oh, sorry, my
sounds better.
World time buddy was off. Okay, you can read her book, Left Out, When the Truth Doesn't Fit In, how she was a Democratic aide who left the Democratic Party because her story did not fit the narrative. Thank you so much. Also follow her at Read Alexandra. Yes, Read Alexandra. That's correct. Thank you for offering to come on Redacted. It's a pleasure.
Thanks, Tara. Great to see you again. Stay safe there.
It was so great talking with you. Take care, and everybody stay safe. Let's try to get peace. Get to peace.
Yeah.